What up, Fab Fanatics? On it here, back with some more flesh and blood content. It's long overdue, but I finally have my Ice Lexi Deck Tech for you. This is the deck that I took to the Orlando Calling. I had a successful day one. I went 5-2 with my only two losses being to the GOAT Matt Rogers and the talented Hayden Dale. Unfortunately, I didn't have as successful of a Sunday and ended up finishing 51st out of 534. But of course, this was definitely a meta call back in November, bringing this to Orlando and going briar hunting. I've actually not changed the deck since Orlando because I've just been so busy. I do anticipate making some changes with Everfest and whatnot, and I'm actually recording this deck tech for you. I'd like to open up the discussion on what you think I should do to make improvements. So with all that being said, if you want to see more content like this, consider liking the video, drop a comment below, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. And here we go, of course, with Lexi Livewire. She has Essence of Ice and Lightning, 4 Intelligence, and 40 life. Her once per turn action, turn a face card down, or face down card in your arsenal face up. If it's a lightning card, your next attack this turn gains go again. If it's an ice card, create a frostbite token under target hero's control, that being your opponent, of course, go again. We're going to be focusing on that second part. We're definitely, the engine of this deck is to get an ice card into your arsenal, flip it at the beginning of your next turn, and then fuse some arrows and make your opponent have some difficult decisions. And of course, the main component of this deck is the trusty old Frostbite. We don't have it in foil yet. I'm hoping we get foil Frostbites in Everfest. We shall wait and see. Cards and activated abilities you control cost an additional resource at the end of a beginning of your end phase, or when you play a card or activate ability, destroy Frostbite. Of course, this will be sitting on your opponent's side once you activate them. Getting into our equipment pieces, I pretty much run the standard Ranger allotment or Lexi allotment. I run Voltaire, of course, strike twice per turn instant, cost 1. You may put an arrow card from your hand face up into an empty arsenal zone you control. If you do, choose one. It gains, choose one, gain +1 until end of turn, or go again. You will definitely be utilizing both of those depending on how and when you're shooting your arrows. So Voltaire is extremely powerful. Keep in mind it is twice per turn instant, so that does not close the combat chain much like Death Dealer, because Death Dealer was an action. So getting into our equipment pieces, of course, the New Horizons, the new Ranger equipment head we got in Tales of Aria. Check out the beautiful playmat underneath it. This was a judge promo, I believe, for Nationals, and I had to get one for myself. New Horizons, while you have a face-up card in your arsenal, you have an additional arsenal zone. Definitely want to take advantage of that using this build. Of course, much like all the other Ranger equipment, it's not friendly when it blocks. It does block for 2, but it's blade break, and when it does block and is destroyed, destroy all cards in your arsenal as well. So there's a huge downside. I do my best not to have to block with it until the very late game, and ideally my arsenal is empty when that happens. I run 2 chess pieces. I run Heart of Ice for the control matchups and for Wizard, of course. Once per turn action, cost 1. Cards and activated abilities cost an opposing hero an additional resource this turn. Go again. It does have Arcane Barrier and Blade Break 1. Keep in mind your opponent does have the ability to respond to activating Heart of Ice before it before it resolves. So, and of course, trusty old Tunic. This is pretty much what I run in most other matchups. Having that extra Tunic resources up is really important for 3-of-a-kind turns and some other tasty cards here in the deck. Of course, it's an instant. Remove 3 energy counters from Spring Tunic to gain a resource. Blade Break 1. 2 arm pieces. I run the Bullseye Bracers mainly for Arcane Barrier in the Rune Blade matchups and Wizard, but occasionally I will use it for its ability, which is destroying it. If I have no cards in arsenal, I put an arrow card from my hand face up into my arsenal, gains +1 and go again. It allows for, once per turn, once per game, usually sending a 3rd arrow at your opponent. And of course, the other is Shock Charmers. And of course, Shock Charmers is very powerful if your opponent does not respect it. It is an instant, cost 2. The next time an attack action card you control hits a hero this turn, it deals 1 damage to them. Spell Void 2. Of course, you're doing that in the reaction phase. And then finally, I run Perch Grapplers. This is my cold foil James White signed version that I got for spoiling the card back in Crucible of War, one of my prize pieces of my collection. I pretty much always use it for blocking. I very rarely use it for its ability. I think I might have used it maybe 3 or 4 times in my career of playing Ranger. Action, of course, it costs 2, which is really expensive. Destroy Perch Grapplers until end of turn. Face down arrows played from your arsenal gained go again. But again, mainly use it to block 2 on those dominate turns. It's really important to block that Herald of Erudition against the Prism matchup. And of course, using it judiciously in Bravo and Oldhim matchups where they're sending big dominate attacks with crush effects at you. So that is the equipment. I am most likely adding Null Rune boots to my equipment selection as well because of the extra wizards that are going to be in the meta. Definitely a few of them popping up locally. So here we go. Let's get into the arrows that I run. These are all ice arrows, ice fuse arrows. First and foremost, the most important one, in my opinion, in this build is Blizzard Bolt. I run a full color set, 3 red, 3 yellow, and 3 blue of Blizzard Bolt, mainly because of its ability when it's fused. Ice Fusion. If Blizzard Bolt was fused, whenever an attack deals damage to a hero this turn, create a Frostbite token under their control. It's really important the first arrow that you send, ideally fusing it so that you put that ability into play for every attack that follows. That's why, even playing a Blizzard Bolt blue for 3, go again, but fused is important. Because then any attacks that follow also have that pesky on-hit effect. And that's what you're really trying to do with this deck is create Frostbites and force your opponent into making awkward blocks in order to avoid more Frostbites or some discard effects. And of course, speaking of discard, the next arrow we have is Chilling Ice Vein. I run reds and yellow of Chilling Ice Vein. Again, Ice Fusion, if it is fused, whenever an attack deals damage to a hero this turn, they discard a card unless they pay 1. Again, getting this arrow sent off first, fusing it, adding that on-hit trigger ability, forcing tough decisions. We also have Frostlock. Frostlock was great in this, meta where Briar was running around, especially the Cheerios Briar. It's a 1-cost blue pitch. Ice Fusion Arrow. Cards and activated abilities cost opposing heroes an additional 1 this turn. And then, of course, if it's fused, it gains +1, which gets to that pesky breakpoint of 4. And if it hits a hero until end of their next turn, they can't pitch or play 0-cost cards, which pretty much turns off 0-cost Briar. And a couple other aggro decks. This was a lot of fun to play in Orlando. I definitely got to hit against a couple Briars and turned off some turns. That is the next arrow. And finally, I have red versions of Flakeout. Of course, Flakeout is also Ice Fusion. If Flakeout was fused, it gains Dominate. This is one of my endgame finishers. Regularly, I'd like to put Flakeout. I'll even pitch Flakeout early to ideally come back to it later because one of the most important things that Ranger has in its end game to finish games, of course, is send Dominate arrows at your opponent. And that is one way to do that. So those are the Ice Fusion arrows that I run. And let's get into the regular class arrows that I run. Bolt and Shot is just so dang good in this build. Of course, you're giving it +1 if it's the first arrow you're sending at your opponent. Of course, it costs 0, which is nice. While Bolt and Shot's attack is greater than its base, it has Go Again. And if it hits, reload. So your opponent really has to respect that, or else they could end up seeing 2 or and eventually 3 arrows coming at them this turn. 0 cost is also really important because this is a very resource-heavy deck because of Voltaire, and so having some 0-cost arrows is really nice, and I'm actually probably considering putting a couple more in. I'm also running Endless Arrow. Again, same reason. It has the on-hit effect. If it hits, put it back into your hand. Your opponent has to respect it, else they can end up revisiting the same arrow a couple times in a turn or the following turn. And then finally, I have Remorseless in here. Because, of course, it's just so dang good against aggro decks. And, of course, I believe it's really good against the Runeblade when you're trying to play non-attacks into attacks. You're penalizing them. Because, of course, if Remorseless hits until end of their next turn, whenever they play an action card, they lose a life. I don't think this is going to be as relevant moving forward as the meta changes. It depends on what we see in Everfest, but I'll probably consider changing this out for more ice synergy. But those are the arrows I have in the deck. I have 30 arrows total in the deck, which might seem on the light side, but I do have some non-arrow attacks as well. So I run the reds of Icy Encounter. So they are 6 attack for 2, and of course it hits, it creates a frostbite. It has a little bit of a downside, it only blocks for 2, but this is in here mainly for the Prism matchups to give me some poppers. And then of course you'll also see why it synergizes with a couple other ice cards here in a moment. But I really like Icy Encounter in there. And again, it gives you a non-arrow attack if needed. I also run 3 Command and Conquers. You know, in the meta that we've been experiencing, you have to be able to threaten your opponent's arsenal. When it comes to the Bolt and Sabers matchup, the combo deck, of course, they regularly putting Illumina Ascension in their arsenal early, and you're going to have to protect it when Command and Conquer comes their way. Briars, well, really, Runeblade, yeah, Briars are putting, you know, Channel Mount Heroic into arsenal in order to fuel a large turn. So threatening, a timely threaten of their arsenal forces some interesting blocks. So there's that. And then the last 2, I actually had kind of slot 79 and 80, were just kind of sitting there, and what I want to fill it with. So I decided to go with blue Winter's Grasp. Of course, you might not think it's all that great. It costs 2 to attack for 4. Doesn't have any on-hill abilities, but it does block for 3, and it is an ice attack, so you can flip this and create a frostbite. And when you pair it with some of the non-attack buffs, you know, it all of a sudden it could easily become 7 for 2 with an on-hit effect. So, and that is that. Those are the attacks that I have in the deck. So that puts me at 37 total. And then let's get into my non-attacks. Non-attacks, of course, 3 of a kind. Us Ranger players, we live and we die by it, as we saw at U.S. Nationals with Isaac. I've been on both sides of it as well, turning 3 of a kind, turning in powerful turns, and then also just straight up whiffing and turning into dud of a turns. So that's just kind of how it is. Of course, it costs 1. Ideally, I want to be playing 3 of a kind off of Tunic. You know, if it's from Arsenal, that's even better. That gives me more options. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily have to be from Arsenal, because it's always nice to have a pump spell or an arrow already in Arsenal going into a 3 of a kind turn. Keep in mind, of course, you draw 3, and until end of turn, you may only play cards from Arsenal. I've made this mistake before early on. Just you're so excited to see a 3 of a kind turn that you forget to maybe play your pump spells like Ice Quake or, you know, Winter's Bite or Weave Ice before you play 3 of a kind, because you can't play it from hand afterwards. So do keep that in mind. And then we get into our ice, synergized ice cards. I run Ice Quake, both reds and blues. I absolutely love Ice Quake. Of course, it costs 1. Your next attack is +3 in red and +1 in blues. Whenever an attack hits a hero this turn, create a Frostbite token under their control. Go again. This works really great, and this is what I was talking about with like Winter's Grasp and Command and Conquer and Icy Encounter. If you have this in Arsenal, you flip it, you create a Frostbite, you have a blue card and one of these attacks, you're playing Ice Quake with pitching a blue, and then you're sending Command and Conquer or Icy Encounter or Winter's Grasp over for 9, 9, 7 with on-hit effects, which is a pretty nice response to having to block out with 2 cards. So Ice Quake is one of my favorite ice pump spells in the game. Right now, of course, we're very limited as far as the options that we have, but yeah, I would possibly even consider running yellows here soon if I can do some more play testing. I also run Weave Ice. Weave Ice is 0 cost. I run reds and blues. Weave Ice, the next ice or elemental attack action card you play this turn, gains +3, and if it's fused, dominate. I'll regularly use the red 3 Weave Ices throughout the game, of course, to turn arrows, make my arrows more powerful. Usually Weave Ice's blues get pitched early in order to fuel turns, which is really nice because you can then come back to Weave Ice blues later in the game, in order to fuse arrows to give them dominate. So it just gives me another option outside of a straight dominated arrow like Flake Out in order to push through damage in the late game. I also run Polar Blast blues. It might not seem all that potent, but it is pesky, especially, you know, if you're playing it from Arsenal. You can draw a card off of it. It does cost 1. Regularly, I like to play this out of Arsenal off of a Tunic. But it is, again, it's a pesky card because, you know, it forces your opponent to use a resource to avoid a dominated attack. It's really fun to bluff with this too if you can't end up fusing. Or I mean, if you know, have the ability to dominate it. Or not with a fuse attack, so do keep that in mind. Ideally, you're playing this from Arsenal, drawing a card, and also flipping it from Arsenal and creating a Frostbite. And of course, the good old Channel Lake Frigid. I run 3 ofs. Channel Lake Frigid is a workhorse in Ice Lexi, in my opinion. Cost 2, pitches for 3. It's an ice card, so it's always nice to play this from Arsenal and flip it, create a Frostbite, and then throw Channel Lake Frigid on the board and see if your opponent wants to respond to it. Cards and activated abilities cost opposing heroes an additional resource. And of course, it has the channeling ability at the beginning of your end phase. Put a flow counter on Channel Lake Frigid, then destroy it, unless you put an ice card from your pitch zone on the bottom of your deck for each flow counter on it. That is an interesting interaction that I was doing wrong early on in my Ice Lexi days. Make sure to put those ice cards under before the rest of your pitch. And I run 3 of those to slow down opponents as well. And then we get into some instance. I run, of course, Pulse of Bolt Haven because it is just so dang powerful. 0 cost. It's the legendary Lightning Ice instant. Double fuse if you can. You know, your next lightning, ice, or elemental attack gains +4. Of course, unfortunately, it has a downside with no block. Run 1 of that, and then the other lightning I run is Lightning Press because it's just so awesome, so powerful. You know, not really any other lightning synergy in here, so I'm not really trying to fuse it. It is nice to flip this in Arsenal every once in a while to get go again, but of course it's lightning instant target attack action card with the cost 1 or less gets +3. So there's that. Let's talk about the kind of sideboard-ish cards that I have. I have 3 Sink Belows in kind of my sideboard. I run these in matchups where I expect dominated attacks and attack reaction shenanigans. I chose Sink over something like Take Cover because it allows for hand filtering, and of course a lot of the times Take Cover you probably already have a card in Arsenal and won't be able to utilize that reload, so that's why I chose Sink. I do have 3 unmovable blues in here as well, mainly for the Bravo matchup and the Oldham matchups with big dominated attacks. I have a lot more blues in here, so paying for a blue immovable is not that difficult, and it is a lot of fun actually to eventually get this in Arsenal and flip it and just have it sitting there waiting for your opponent. Be like, hey, I have my unmovable, and for when you're ready to try to dominate, you know, attack me. So it's pretty fun to play that cat and mouse game. So I run 3 immovables. And of course we got Blizzard, which you know, was really strong and powerful early in the Tails meta, but I think you know, we're seeing the meta develop, and players are packing a lot more blues and leaving more resources open or up in order to combat cards like Blizzard. So I don't even know if it's really needed to be a 3 of anymore. It is of course an ice instant, so you could flip it for Frostbites and then just kind of let it sit there too, and again play that cat and mouse game like unmovable, and it's like, hey, there it is, what you gonna do? You got to account for it. So and then finally I do have 1 remembrance for those kind of longer control games where I expect to get you know, through my deck at least you know, at least once if not twice, and of course regularly in like a Bravo matchup or an Oldham or Dash, something along those lines, I'll play this in order to get back my big threats, Command and Conquers, and some of my big arrows. So there you have it. That is my Ice Lexi build. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I'm interested to hear your feedback. Are you playing Ice Lexi? What are you doing differently? What would you suggest? Let's open up the discussion. As always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.